I'm Clever Ghoul, but you can call me Nikki. Welcome back to the channel. This week, I'm doing a project that I've had on my list for years and years and years. A large papier-mâché crescent moon. I originally saw old wedding pictures from the 1920s on Pinterest, I think, and there were many where the bride and groom were sitting in front of a giant paper moon, and I just knew I wanted to make one. I am doing a man in the moon, or in this case, a woman in the moon. I was hoping to have this for y'all last week, but I underestimated how long the papier-mâché would take to dry with this being almost 3 feet tall, so I had to add on an additional week to get everything done. So with all that being said, let's get into it. To start, I picked up one of those tri-fold presentation boards that you can get at the craft store, and then I came home and drew out my moon on my iPad. When making the profile, I actually pulled up a picture of Stevie Nicks, who's someone I love so much, and I just thought her profile of all profiles would be the perfect one to reference when making this moon.
Next, I taped up the folds of the presentation board, stood it upright, and projected my sketch onto it so that I could trace it on. From there, I traced the face so that I had it as a reference for later on, and then I cut out the moon with an X-Acto knife. Once that was done, I wanted to start making the structure for the moon. This isn't going to be flat, so I needed to make some structural supports. I cut some small cardboard arches for the tips of the moon, then made slightly larger ones that would go down the main body of the moon. I attached all of these with copious amounts of hot glue. Once those were in, I penciled in the mound for her cheek, then wadded up some paper to essentially sculpt that part of the face. And then I continued that process, adding in more details of the face like the brow, nose, cheekbones, and eyes. Then I started to glue down paper, old plastic bags, and even pool noodles to start filling in the rest of the moon. I kept going, covering the whole thing in paper and tape before adding in one last layer of butcher paper with hot glue to sort of seal the whole thing together so that it felt solid enough to begin the papier-mâché process. There are many ways to make papier-mâché paste, but the way I do it is by mixing some Mod Podge with a little bit of water and some salt to prevent mildewing. This can be more of an expensive way to do it because you will use a lot of glue, but it's just the method that works for me. I take a strip of paper, dip it in my paste, spread the paste on both sides, and then use my fingers to smooth it down on top of the piece. You can use a brush, but again, I prefer this method as I like the control and dexterity using my fingers gives me. I would do one even layer across the entire moon and leave it overnight to dry. The next day, I would repeat the same process. This time, I started by making sure paper wrapped around all the edges of the moon, and then I let that dry for several hours before adding in a layer over the entire moon, again, leaving this to dry overnight. I did this one more time, making sure that I had a really solid layer of papier-mâché before moving on. Next, I sanded any rough folds or ridges with a piece of fine sandpaper. Then I patched any holes with Quick Seal, and lastly, adding in some lightweight spackle, both to smooth out any of the areas I felt needed a little help, as well as add in moon-like texture. I left that to dry for a day before I took it outside to sand and spray down with Krylon White Spray Primer. It took 3 coats to get fully primed, and I let it sit for another day before moving on to painting. I started by sponging on gold metallic paint around the outer edges of the moon just to see if I would like it. I did, and I kept going thinking maybe this would work as some sort of underpainting, but a lot of it got hidden in my next steps. I used a buttermilk acrylic paint to cover the entire moon. I did about 3 coats total. Once that was dry, I brought that gold paint back out and I sponged it around the edges like I had done previously. I also added in some gold around the center of the moon very lightly just to kind of marry everything together. Once dry, I mixed a little bit of gold and some coral paint to sponge on the cheek and lips, while also using a sponge with some of that buttermilk paint to soften any harsh lines and blend everything together. Then I added in more color to the face, slowly adding in details to get it just right. Lastly, I took this outside and sprayed it with Krylon Satin Finish in order to seal up all of my work, which means it's time for the reveal. Here she is. As you can see, she's enormous, but I love her so much. I'm just so happy with how it turned out. I think it looks incredible. And honestly, it looks even better in person. I wish you could all see it in person, but I hope the camera does it some justice. Like I said, this is a project that I've had on my list for years, and so getting to execute it over the last couple of weeks has been really wonderful. It's kind of been cathartic a little bit. I didn't realize how much I needed to just kind of sit and create something and let it pour out of me like I did. And while I'm really happy making quick tutorials on how to do fun craft projects, this really helped pull out my creativity and get in touch with myself as an artist. And for that alone, I'm really grateful that I got to do this project this week. I think eventually I'm gonna hang her up above my bed, but for now, I'm kind of playing with just putting her in different places around the house. I did add a piece of wood on the back for support, and so that it would stay completely stable, and so that when I go to hang it up, it won't be an issue. I know the moon is often seen as silver. In fact, I've done a project here where I used silver paint to help make the moon, but I really wanted this to be more of like the suns and moons you would see in the 90s, that sort of whimsigoth style. I think the gold and the warmer white really helped tie that all together. I'm just really happy with how this turned out. Anyway, thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!